Hi, my name is James McIntosh. I'm the country head of CITIC CLSA in Australia, and with me today I have Mr. Ben Darwin, Gainline Analytics, and we're here for the Director's Cut. Ben, thank you again for being with us after a successful forum last year, of which on stage you did make a fool of me, so I appreciate that. For those of the people watching that don't know you, do you want to give a brief introduction to yourself and to your business?
So my background was in playing rugby, played professionally till I was 27, had a spinal injury, started doing coaching, did that for a number of years with some expansion clubs, and then got into data analytics over time, and then 2013 finished up a job at Suntory in Japan and came back to Australia and began Gainline Analytics. I was basically unemployed from, what do you do when you lose your job? You start a consultancy firm. So Gainline's basically just an unemployment option that's gotten out of hand. And so now we're in 11 years. And we, as an organisation, we help people to understand performance, the drivers of performance, why they are where they are, and what they can do about it.
Yeah. I think working in finance, and this obviously being a finance forum, I think kind of one of the things that I've always loved about your business is while a lot of the foundations you bring to it from sport is there's actually a finance background to it, and you've mentioned a book that's been written before. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes, I mean, first of all, my old man was AMP for a long time, so I've always been around financial services industry. He had a company called CBD Financial Planning, and the original book was Grossberg at Harvard Business School. He wrote a book called Chasing Stars, which is about the portability of talent, and we've sort of applied some of his theories to sport, but also to taking other work in military research, hospital research, HR data, and just applied it to sport and found it to be very predictive. And so it would only be natural that we end up sort of looping back. And that's what we found. There's no money in sport, weirdly. Everyone wants everything for free. So that's why we do things like this. And also we're finding, really strong correlations of that work into the financial services market, into companies and how they're built.
At this forum, there's many industry leaders, and I think some of the things that you speak about is how you can assist management teams and CEOs in their roles. Can you talk to us about that?
I think the biggest thing is that chaos will oftentimes cloud causality. And what I mean by that is when something goes wrong, we always feel the need for change. The problem is change will have different impacts over time. So in football, for example, a club will change a manager, a new manager will come in and change the way the team plays, and it'll take time for that team to adapt. So now you've got two problems. You've got, is it the way the team's playing, is it the players, or is it the manager? Who do we fire? So in chaos, whenever you create change, there tends to be a real lack of understanding. So one of the biggest things for us is having patience as an organisation, the speed of change, and how they build over time to be successful. And one thing is we talk about growth being the enemy of understanding. The more people you have, the harder it is to work together. Therefore, you're going to have to, do certain things to build yourself to be successful, the same way the military does. Military breaks itself up as it grows bigger and bigger, but then the silos of your business will start to divert in their behaviour, so you have to adjust to that. So we're really just trying to help them to understand the decisions they make, what the ramifications are of those decisions, and it can last years sometimes. And we can see organisationally, one of the organisations we went back and measured was AMP, and it's, I won't say fall from grace, it's gone from being one of the highest cohesion companies in Australia to probably one of the lowest over the last 25 years as we measure them. And sometimes it's difficult to see, and particularly a lot of good people get blamed when things go wrong.
I was on your website the other day and I saw that you guys had looked at Ajax, the football
Ajax,
club.
yes.
And that's a great case study, I thought.
Well, we're actually presenting on that today, so one of the things is the actual astronomical amount of money they've spent and increased, and they've actually gotten worse. Yeah. And particularly the amount of goals allowed. Basically, in football, the thing you do together is defend. The thing you do as individuals is score. So whenever you turn over the team, the points against you will go up. Yes. And so we've seen that. We were just doing Chelsea the other day. They've gone through the same thing. Man United when Ferguson left. Yeah. Now, the one thing I'd say is that not every manager who's been at Man United since Ferguson left has been a bad manager. So is it the governance and the lack of patience that they have and the continuous changing of management that's causing the issues? Or is it just they've been really unlucky that everyone who's come there has turned out to be a lemon? What's the more likely scenario? Yeah.
As a Manchester United fan,
so you're the one.
I've been suffering through that.
Yeah, it's been a difficult 11 years. Yeah.
One of the things I was wondering when I thought about catching up with you again is, I think you mentioned it's 11 years now that you guys have been going. Has anything changed in the way that you guys operate, or is there any of the kind of, I guess, the rules that you operate by shifted over that time, or is it?
Absolutely, it's one of those things. When you start doing something, you think it's everything, and then you start to question it. And every time a team comes along who doesn't break the rules, but will be not an aberration, but if you set a set of rules and you say, okay, only clubs who develop within will win. Well, that's not the case. Sometimes a club will come in, develop from the outside. Okay, how do they do that? So we've tended to refine it and refine it and refine it and not change the observations, but build into that. So one of the things you saw this year, for example, was the Bulldogs. Bulldogs have been amazing in terms of in the NRL, how much they've improved. And one of the things we started to look at was, well, they really seem to be really stable through the middle. So how does that work? How does the middle affect you defensively? What does that do to your team? And so that's a great learning opportunity for us. So I'd say that the thing we keep coming back to is, what's the truth of performance?
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to hold to a philosophy. We're just going to say, what is driving performance? What can you do? So, one club, and I'll give you this example, in netball in the UK, they were started by Wasps Rugby Club, who also no longer exists, by the way. But they decided to start a new netball club. So they took the entire starting 7 from another club and brought them across and won the title. That's one way to do it.
Yeah.
The only problem is that's a really good way to distract value, because you have to pay those people to come across.
Yeah.
They won't stay, and now the club doesn't exist anymore. But if you're looking for performance tomorrow, borrowing cohesion is an interesting way to do it.
Yeah. I guess kind of looking back over the past 11 years, I was kind of wondering, of the people that you've worked with, what are the best success stories, and what do you think is the reason behind that success?
One of the most satisfying ones that we had was actually an English rugby club, which also doesn't exist now, but that's not our doing, was Worcester. So we were working with a guy called Gary Gold, and he said to us, we've got 10 weeks to not be relegated, and they were sitting in last at the time. Yeah, wow. And so we said, okay, what we're going to work on is, how do we put together a team that is capable of winning 2 of the last 3 games? And so that's what it became about. Is the first 7, we said, let's put aside outcomes, because we're going to lose anyway. Yeah. How do we build a team to do that? And so that was a really sort of short turnaround. Yeah. Other organisations, I think Saracens, we've worked with. We don't generally actually too much mention the clubs we're with, because sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't. Yeah. But Saracens have been able to pick themselves off of the back of a salary cap and go back and win the title. Yeah. And there was a particular game 2 years ago where we were really building the club around saying, not only we want to have it, like, we knew their starting 15 was good enough to win the comp, but could they deal with injuries? And they lost 3 guys the week of the final and still won the game. Yeah. And our work actually became about, how do we build in for you to deal with changes? And because we always say to clubs, we don't want you to have one choice, we want you to have 2 good choices. So this player comes off, the next guy coming on exactly knows what to do. So we were really happy about how that built out, and you almost pressure tested it, and it worked. And they did it in the game, and that was pretty satisfying.
An interesting thing that you bring up there, like, getting brought in with 10 games left in the season, I would have imagined that most of the people that you speak to are probably thinking a bit longer term, or how do
it all depends upon the pressure. Yeah. If you were told, James, you've got to get great outcomes next week. Yeah. I mean, let's say Brazilian football, the average manager in Brazilian football lasts 3 months. Right, like in Championship, I think it's 0.9, whereas the AFL's 5.5 years. Yeah, wow. It's the most stable league in the world, most stable from a management perspective. So it really depends upon the view and the pressure and where it's coming from. Yeah. One of the problems with rugby in Australia is we're always thinking, how do we win the next game? It's like, we need to think way beyond that scenario. And what I would say is, most of the people we work with are either winning everything and want to keep winning everything, or everything's collapsed. Yeah. The people who are in the middle always feel like they're one win away, everything's going to be okay. And interestingly, there are teams who will make finals. We talk about, you can win a final and destroy a team at the same time. Yeah. They can actually be winning finals, but actually much further away from sustainable success than the team that's coming last.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about to flip it on its head and be devil's advocate? Is there any industries that you've tried to take what you've learnt and use it, and it hasn't kind of got through to, or it doesn't kind of fit the industry?
What I would say is that the AFL has more gatekeepers than any other industry I've ever found. Like, people trying to stop you from having conversations. EPL, who could buy the AFL clubs, it's very much less of a problem. They're really keen on solutions. Yeah. What I would say is that because the AFL is so stable, we can't make as much improvement as we could to other teams in other competitions. It really depends. Like in business, interestingly, the funereal industry, like funeral homes, is the most stable. It's the AFL of of industries. Like it's the most stable because it's all run by families. Right. And one thing we'd say is you would not put a listed company in that industry because you would just be annihilated. Whereas other industries are really unstable. And so we go to those and they'd say, I understand everything you're saying, but I have to win tomorrow. So it's just about understanding the context of the conversation.
Yeah, understood. We've been talking about hiring people recently, and someone was saying to me that, you know, and it could be in sport as well as any kind of job, I guess. Like if you have a group of average players that have worked together for a long time, they'll perform better than a group of superstars thrown together last minute. That I can have to only assume that you'd agree with that. And
I think the mistake you're making is thinking that the people who are winning are not average.
Yeah.
Like Cameron Smith, Cooper Cronk, Billy Slater, everyone puts them on this. Like if you build a team to be, you know, one thing that people kept saying to me was, you know, you're at the Brumbies, you guys are winning. What an amazing bunch of people. What an amazing culture you must have. And I'm like, they are the worst behaved bunch of humans I've ever known in my life. I can't look at them that way. Like, it's an amazing skill. So, you know, extraordinary teams are filled with very ordinary people. But they're extraordinarily well put together. The problem is when they're winning, everyone says they have an amazing culture. They're doing, they're amazing individuals. That's attribution bias. We overly attribute success to the individual. And then teams who are failing, the example I give, 1998, Brisbane Lions are coming last, and the commentators saying there is not a player on the field who should be playing in the AFL. And 21 of them went back to back to back, and then won a fourth. And then the commentators saying they shall forever be remembered as some of the greatest players in the history of the AFL. It's like, you idiots, right?
One of the things that, in my role, kind of trying to build the team that we have back in Australia is we try to put culture first when we're employing people. And I've actually seen there's a big push now in recruiting in trying to pick people's culture over their skills. Is that something that you guys have looked at? Because obviously skills can be trained, but if you find someone that's a correct cultural fit for a business, I don't know if that's something that you guys
I can totally tell you my experiences. If you bring someone into an organisation and you can get on with them fantastically well, that's always helpful. But if they want to do things how they've done them before, and the problem is under duress they'll revert back, then the tension starts to come. We would have guys we'd bring into the Brumbies, right? And let's say this guy had been a centre his whole life. We try to put him on the wing and he can't do it. It's like we end up yelling at him, like you need to adjust here, you need to adjust. And then the tension comes between us, right? So I think that oftentimes the skills and the habits will create the tension. Like someone can be amazing at another place. They'll say he's the greatest guy you've ever met. You bring him to you and it's a disaster. Like we've all experienced that. So I would say that the habits will drive the tension. And oftentimes that will create scenarios where you don't necessarily get on with people. But you also need to have patience with people. It's like you bring this guy in, if he's a good guy, you get used to it. But what tends to, you know, I remember talking to a guy who's an NRL team. Let's say this team's won a premiership. I'm not going to mention who the player is. And this guy said to me, this guy was a nightmare to deal with, but he was our nightmare to deal with. And we knew how to push his buttons. We knew how to get him going. And we did love him. So we just, we dealt with it. It's like family, right? Like family businesses are run by people who fight all the time. And interestingly, fighting is a really good sign that people are comfortable with each other. Like at the Brumbies, we had a rule basically: if there was a fight that week, we knew we were going to have a good game. The other view is it's got to be peaceful. But if things are peaceful, it means they're not saying the things they need to say to one another. It's quite funny when you think the amount of times that press blow up fights, you know, in any kind of sporting event. It's not something that happens that often in the office anymore in this day and age. But you need to be comfortable to be disagreeing with each other, right? No, for sure. I was thinking about, maybe this is kind of, actually it probably fits into all areas, but how important is pay in the overall equation? Because we often see team members leave as they want more money. It happens in finance a lot. I think to your point, average players in great teams, they probably get a self of worth in sports as well. But then when you think about it, the loss of a valued team member, the time it takes to rehire, the time of management to resource that new talent, have you guys looked at how you should look at when that person comes and says, I want more money, and like how that can hurt the cohesive environment? And I think the thing to always take it from is that, you know, whenever there's been studies done on retaining human capital, is they vastly underestimate the damage that is done by change. Because they look at the performance of the person, not by the performance of everyone around them, right? Is all the adaptation you have to make to the new employee, and you jump out of your role and you have to do things. So I don't think that's necessarily understood. The other thing is that the longer you are somewhere, the more loyal you'll tend to be. So if you've been at a place if you've been CLSA for a long time, God forbid they come to you and say, Tosh, would you take a 20% pay cut?
Yeah.
You think, you know what, these people have looked after me. You'll probably do it. If you've been there 3 months and they say, take a pay cut, you're like, that's not happening. So if you look at Tom Brady, what he did at the Patriots in order to help them to retain their talent is he could see a wider picture. You know, there's a turn of phrase in football, which is you look after your academy looks after you. If you look after your people, they will in turn look after you.
Yeah.
And so I think money is quite, everyone's going to be different. Everyone's going to have different priorities around what they need. But priorities will change for people given the context of one, how the organisation behaves and how they treat people, and then how that person in turn sort of behaves towards the organisation. So I don't think it's a case of saying everyone says loyalty's gone. Yeah, I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think loyalty is very malleable and it moves and shifts all the time depending on how we're treated, vice versa.
No, without a doubt. That was kind of the main questions I had for you today. If there's any kind of parting words that you'd like to leave for anyone at the forum that in terms of kind of why they should catch up with you whilst you're here?
I think the biggest thing for us is that teams are teams are teams. It doesn't matter whether it's in sport or business or whatever industry it might be, is that treating people well and having faith in the people you have. I think you always tend to be surprised. There's so many times when you bring someone into an organisation and there's nothing more dumb than a new employee. Right? They're taking on so much information, and if you stick with that person, they will adapt and they will learn. And then further down the line, that bad employee becomes the David Beckhams of the world, right? It's the guy you want and the guy who's be loyal to you, and you take care of one another. And I think it's really, really important to understand the context for that person. What are they having to learn, but what are they having to unlearn in order to be effective? Yeah. And once you have patience for that and understand it, you'll get much more rewarded. It's the knee-jerk that kills you. Yeah. It's the panic, change that leads you down the AMP path of self-destruction, so to speak.
Thank you so much for your time. For the clients of CLSA, keep an eye out for some work that Ben's firm has been doing with our research team, and we look forward to seeing you up on stage later today.
Thank you.
Cheers.